Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share my first update on my experience with the Gigabyte Aero 15XC. Now, for those of you that have been following my KC coverage, which is the $1,600 model, this is the $2,200 model. Key difference being, even though we've got the same Intel Core i7-10870H 8-core CPU, we have Nvidia's RTX 3070 rather than the 3060, and instead of 16 gigs of RAM, we have 32, and instead of a ½ terabyte NVMe SSD, we have a 1 terabyte NVMe. Now, with that out of the way, you know the pricing difference, again, $1,600 versus $2,200, but basically everything else is identical. Now, in terms of performance, you can already see that is not identical because we're now benchmarking in another league, 9,163 on TimeSpy. This is akin to what I've been getting out of the Asus G15 with the AMD Ryzen 9 5900HS and the 3070. So that is good to see. It means that, of course, performance is available in the form, if you're looking for more, of the XC model. But you'd expect that. Again, it's $2,200. This is part of the reason that so many people think that the Asus G15 is such a great value at $1,800 US. But in my opinion, for the price difference, it appears this could be the better option for me personally. Now, whether or not it's the better option for all of you is another story altogether. Now, in the limited time I've spent with it, gaming has been very good, essentially, actually a little bit better than what I've been getting out of the G15. And that's because the GPU on this machine is getting a little bit more wattage, 105 watts to be exact, which means that when you're plugged in to its 230 watt supply, you are going to get more juice than you can out of the Asus G15. So even though the CPU in here is not as powerful as the AMD chip in the Asus G15, at the end of the day, the optimization for Intel plus more wattage going to the RTX 3070 actually makes this, at least in my experience so far, the more powerful machine at the end of the day than the Asus G15. Now, I haven't made a final decision, but I'm getting very close. I can tell you that now. I did ship back my KC version. For those of you wondering about the Thunderbolt issue, I did end up resolving it, but because I saw the benchmark numbers here and because I felt that this really would deliver what I would end up wanting, even with the big jump from 1,600 to 2,200, I feel like it is going to boil down to either this machine or the Asus G15 for my personal and professional needs. Now, if you've been following my coverage, you already know I'm looking personally for a gaming slash workstation that really gives me the best of both worlds. And I've always felt the Aero 15 did a better job of that than the G15 just because it's got Thunderbolt 3, it has HDMI 2.1, DisplayPort 1.4. We're talking about not a hybrid port, although it wouldn't have been bad had they given us a Type-C. No trickle charge on this. You do have to use the good old 230 watt generic brick, but the fact that it's generic isn't a bad thing either because availability isn't going to be an issue. No ransom, not that it's inexpensive to buy one of these. Full-size SD card slot on this machine, just like the KC. But again, performance here is better. So back to those issues. The Thunderbolt 3 port croaking, dying on me, was a product of their control center, them being Gigabyte. And if you followed my reviews, updates on the system, then you already know that I personally find the Asus to have a better software offering when it comes to control of the machine. The Gigabyte Control Center is just about worse in every possible way. The software updating is atrocious, so when you go to Smart Utilities, which I don't recommend, and I may do a dedicated video about this, I would stay as far away from their Smart Utility update. Instead, I suggest users go to the Gigabyte support website for their specific model, whether you have this the KC or the 3080 model. I don't recommend the 3080 model. None of the 3080 models, unfortunately, this generation here in 2021 seem to justify their price to performance ratio. But if you want to spend $3,500, of course you can. But at $2,200, this might be the sweet spot. Really the best of everything, in my opinion. Not perfect, nothing is, I always say that. But again, when it comes to trying to automatically update all of the firmware, BIOS, everything inside of the Gigabyte Control Center, it is a total mess. In fact, that is what caused the problem with the Thunderbolt 3 port on the KC model that I shipped back today. So basically what happened was, after doing one of these updates that takes far too long, considering we've got an Intel Wi-Fi 6 chipset that has no problems performing, it essentially, on the reboot, the Thunderbolt port was dead. Nothing could work. It wasn't that simple. I disconnected it from a Thunderbolt 3 dock, and then it was dead. So I can't just say after the update. It was literally upon disconnecting, and that's why I thought maybe it was a hardware malfunction. So let me clarify that in case I just confused anyone. Basically, the steps I took that followed were to essentially reinstall Windows, do a recovery, and reinstall drivers, but not using the control center. And after doing that, I was able to get the Thunderbolt 3 port functional again. So from a software side, Gigabyte not doing an amazing job, but I will say, and this is not in their defense, most manufacturers do a pretty crappy job. Gigabyte is no exception. Asus is not doing a great job with their machine either. So again, I don't expect perfection. But the control center, I mean, it's better than having nothing, because it does give you more control over things like your fan speed. But if you're using the Microsoft Azure AI that I don't recommend using, at least in my experience so far, it doesn't permit you to actually retain your fan profile that you select from one boot to the next, which is yet another software side thing that Gigabyte should address. Hopefully they will. That's just another thing to be aware of that exists both in the KC and this XC model. But the extra horsepower is here. It's alive and well. Now, one downside to this is the actual drive that comes inside of it, which I did already pull out, because as soon as I benchmarked it, I was not impressed. And so that means we now know what lives inside of this model, as well as the KC, which they are Kingston NVMe drives. And that explains why the performance is mediocre. I mean, it's not awful. It's still an NVMe drive. It's faster than some drives out there, but it's certainly not a best-in-class performer. So I did clone it using the Sabrent dual NVMe enclosure that I covered a while back. This allows you to not only use this as a dual NVMe drive over Type-C, but then independently you can clone drives offline. So really ideal. I was able to clone the 1 terabyte drive that you just saw that came inside of this machine in a little under 20 minutes to the Sabrent drive that's in here now, which is, for those of you wondering, is the Rocket 4 Plus. Now that is a 4th gen NVMe. This does not support it, but it's still best in class even in Gen 3. The read-write, both around 3200, give or take. So best in class performance, and that is part of the numbers you're seeing here. If I decide that this isn't going to be my machine, that drive will end up getting a clone from the Asus image. It's really that simple. But there's no question, on paper and in my experience, the Aero does provide more of what I'm looking for than the G15. And if you've followed my videos, you already know that. Also, from a stability standpoint, the G15 has delivered outside of the Thunderbolt port, which we now know is software, not hardware. So, other things you should know beyond the gorgeous display, which I've got the brightness cranked all the way down, because if I crank it all the way up, it'll just be blown out. Full RGB per key backlighting on this. I do have it set to blue. If you haven't noticed, I like the color blue. It's not, I don't have a favorite, but when it comes to black and blue contrast. I do dig it. Love the numerical pad. The fingerprint scanner on this, I don't really use, but it's functional. Now the trackpad is substantially smaller than what you get with the G15 that I've been covering, but I have no issue with that. It's still large enough for me to take care of whatever I'm doing. If I'm going to game, I'm not using it anyway. In fact, people start talking about, well, it's a 60 hertz panel. Yeah, but it's an OLED. I'll take that any day over a higher refresh rate IPS panel. I don't care. If I want to really game, I will connect this to one of my monitors, and then I'll have my high refresh combined with either OLED or IPS, whichever flavor I pick, since I have both right to the left of me. Hope you didn't get confused by right to the left of me. Other things you should know, obviously I've shown this off in terms of what you can do with the per key. It's pretty cool. I mean, it's not something I really care about, but it's still pretty cool. I mean, it is unique, no question about it. I think that the fact that they have a webcam, even though it's potato quality, is still great. You have the little privacy switch, which, just like on the KC, is a little crooked, so QC on that, not amazing. Speaker quality is fine. It's not blown out. A little tinny here and there, so I don't think software is going to address that, but it's serviceable. We don't have a popping defect like we do with the Asus G15. And by the way, a comparison will be coming between the Aero, this model, the 3070, the XC, and the Asus G15, since they are clearly more on the same spec level than the KC model that I was previously comparing it, which was less expensive and couldn't deliver the same amount of performance, although arguably it did get very close. So in here, you can play with the color gradient. You can go with the X-Rite Pantone, which is what I generally stick with, because then you do have essentially as color accurate a display as money can buy, which is part of what I like about the OLED panel, other than it just actually looking better than anything on the market. And again, the 60 hertz refresh rate easily remedied by connecting a higher refresh rate monitor, whether it's my LG 48CX or one of my Asus ROG 4K G-Sync monsters with true HDR. So that we've gotten out of the way. Beyond that, the 32 gigs of RAM, if you need it, you need it. I wanted it for things like video editing and other applications beyond gaming where I know I need the headroom. Most of you out there won't need more than 16 gigs, but it's just something to be aware of, okay? You can see I've also got Sabrent Rocket Sabrent Rocket Q in there, 4 terabyte, and that's video for another day. Those will end up staying in here if I end up sticking with this machine. Simple installation process, nothing crazy. You do need some tools, you need a little know-how, but that's nothing new. So really the moral of the story here is that the Aero 15 in the XC flavor is outperforming both in video editing as well as gaming the G15. However, it does not outperform it when it comes to battery life. Battery life is still in favor of the Asus G15. So this is essentially pulling the same battery life so far as the Aero 15 KC. So you're looking at about 5-6 hours, depending on your brightness levels, battery saver mode, and what you're doing with it. How loud it gets, the fan noise, it's pretty minimal unless under load. Thermals, excellent. Actually better than the G15 from what I'm experiencing with the 3070, side by side. Gaming, I've been able to play Cyberpunk, PlayerUnknown Battlegrounds, Call of Duty World War II, of course, Rust, Call of Duty, Warzone, all of those titles without a hiccup, maxed out, but not in 4K. So in 4K, they are playable. You're looking at anywhere, and I probably will end up doing a demo of that, of 30 to 40 frames, very similar to what 30 is really what your expectations should be. Very similar to what I was getting out of the Asus G15, but there are a few more frames to be gained here. On average, somewhere between 5 to 10 frames per title. It really depends on the game, as it always does with any testing of a system. But something you all should know. And to give you an idea of the gap between the Kingston drive that comes standard and the drive that I have in here now, again, the Sabrent, the 4 Plus, which is really a blistering drive. I'll show you right now, just on a quick test. I mean, as I stated, over 3,000 on the read and write. I think that the Kingston drive that comes with it, I was seeing around a little under 2,000 on the read and write. So I was not impressed with that. Again, that out of the box, what comes in here will underperform the Asus G15's 1 terabyte NVMe that comes stock. But again, the beauty here is no soldered RAM. You do have Thunderbolt, which to me is critical. I wish we had trickle charge, but you already know that if you've watched my other videos. I don't know why they wouldn't integrate that. Even though we have HDMI 2.1, that isn't going to be how you're going to leverage the Nvidia 3070. So I already ordered, which arrived today, this bad boy right here, which is also Cable Matters, ironically. By the way, I have no affiliation with Gigabyte or Cable Matters. You know, I always disclose when I've gotten a product for free or for review. None of these things are free or for review. This is me purchasing and trying to make my own decision. And Cable Matters was also the same company that produced the DisplayPort 1.4 to HDMI 2.1 that I used for the G15 test that I was just mentioning. So I'll be trying this out as well with my Asus 4K HDR monitors to see what we pull. This is a display, a mini DisplayPort 1.4 to full-size DisplayPort 1.4, which means I will be able to get 4K at 144 hertz, which is the native on my Asus, the PQ monitors that I have to my left. And I can, you know, alternatively see what HDMI output looks like, but it's not going to do much. And this is a 10-foot cable. Very inexpensive. I'll put a link in the description. I'm assuming it's going to work. There's no reason it wouldn't. Now, on the previous generation Aeros, you know, the DisplayPort was a hybrid Type-C port like what's on the Asus G15. I wish we got that here because that also, I think, alternatively would have meant that we would have had power delivery. But again, no machine is perfect. So, you know, you got to work with what's out there. This still looks like it's got the edge for me over the G15, even though it's more expensive. There is more performance and more versatility, even if it's at the expense of a little less battery life. I would say roughly an hour less battery life. And that's with the iGPU off on the G15. And again, full-size SD card slot, real HDMI 2.1, even if it's not being utilized by the 3070. Still better to have that spec. If you ever want to watch an 8K video, the time comes. It's a little bit of future-proofing. Goes a long way. Webcam, in my opinion, a more dynamic keyboard, and I don't just mean all the Christmas lights, and which I should probably shut off at this point because they might make me a little bit nuts. And it's just, you know, build quality is solid. In my previous video, I had talked about the KC deck getting a little bit warped. None of that here. Totally solid. So that's another thing that I want to point out. Video editing, 4K editing, slightly faster here, a little bit faster than the G15. These are things that I will cover in my comparison to the Asus that I will probably end up doing tomorrow. So overall, very impressed with this model. One of you out there in the comments said you had purchased it and it was great. I have to agree. So far, it's looking like this is going to be the machine for me, barring any freak accidents, aka quality control problems, software issues. I contemplated doing a completely clean install of Windows on here, but you know, the install is fairly clean to begin with. I mean, the only thing that really is on the machine out of the box is the Gigabyte Control Center. and their little Aero 15 OLED sample, which is gorgeous because it just shows off how phenomenal the display is. No, nothing new about that. So really it comes down to, is this the right machine for you? Do you care about having Thunderbolt 3? For me personally, having this machine docked with a Thunderbolt 3 hub is important. Also, I have a lot of Thunderbolt 3 external NVMe storage, which, the difference is basically on the Asus, we're looking at 700 to 800 megabytes a second versus a gigabyte to a gigabyte and a half per second. That may not sound like a tremendous difference, but it is. And of all the external storage I have, I would have essentially been tabling over $1,000 worth of storage that wouldn't be able to function with the G15. So that's another thing I have to take into consideration, obviously. But overall, we now know the Thunderbolt 3 thing is software. Hopefully, I won't run into any QC issues here, but thermals are good, gaming is good. Benchmarking, you already saw, it's pulling numbers just like the G15. Granted, it's more expensive. That still tells you a lot of what you need to know about the Aero 15 XC model. I think at $2,200, this is still a bargain because if you look at last year, this same position with the 2070, 32 gigs of RAM, I'm pretty sure the starting price was $2,500. And the reason pricing is softer this year is because we have competition. It's not a pandemic special for us. It's because AMD and Intel actually are competing for the first time pretty much ever. And I'm glad because, I'm tired of, Intel being the only game in town. Now, that doesn't mean that Intel isn't still the more stable game in town. And that's what my experience has been so far comparing the Asus and the Gigabyte machines, is that as good as that 35-watt Ryzen 9 chip is, stability and also FreeSync and what's there, they don't amount to as much as they might next year or later this year as AMD firms things up and a lot of the hype turns into tangible performance. So I hope this update helps those of you that are on the fence trying to figure out what to do. Again, the Thunderbolt issue is resolved, and if it occurs again, I know how to resolve it, which is a reinstall. I do recommend, if you buy this right out of the box, do yourself a favor and create, that smart USB backup, which it's a must, because if you run into any problems, you want that disk image, you want to be able to immediately clean things up and get back to square one. So that rounds things out. This is just my first update on the experience with the Gigabyte Aero 15 XC. Keep your eyes and ears open for the comparison between this machine and, of course, the Asus G15, because that is definitely going to happen very soon, because I've got to make a decision. I'm running out of time. The return period on the G15 is closing in on me, and I've got to pick one or the other. I think everyone who's watched my coverage has known that I've favored the Aero, but once the Thunderbolt thing happened, all of a sudden the G15 was looking like a rose. Now, with the extra performance of this particular build, things just got a whole hell of a lot closer, and yeah, so we'll see. I will keep all of you posted. You see the Crystal Disk Mark, benchmarks here. I've run it and gotten better results than this. Again, this is not the stock drive, but very easy to upgrade, and that is another video that I may do tomorrow for all of you. If you're interested, let me know in the comments, because I will take you through disassembling and installing, talk about the cloning process, all of that good stuff. The two drives that I have in here right now, which total to 6 terabytes. Again, the Sabrent Rocket 4 Plus, which is really next generation storage, and then the Sabrent, Rocket Q 4 terabyte. Both expensive drives. I think this one is about 400. This one is a little over 700 US. I'll include links there as well. That is right now what is under the hood in this beast. Again, amounting to 6 terabytes of pure performance. and pair that with a beautiful display, great keyboard, great GPU, and basically modern ports all around. It's got the I/O I'm looking for. I just wish it had trickle charge. Come on, Gigabyte. Why is that Thunderbolt port not able to at least trickle? We need that trickle. Give me that trickle. And yeah, the brick is, well, a brick, but what do you expect on a gaming laptop? Overall, this machine is looking really, really nice. And by the way, those benchmarks are with the studio drivers, not the game-ready drivers, for those of you that are wondering. So again, quiet, no real thermal throttling, performance that actually is slightly besting the Asus G15. The Aero 15 XE is looking like a winner from every angle right now. Any questions or comments, please feel free to post them. Hit that like button, and as usual, please feel free to subscribe, and please stay safe. Later.